Have you ever noticed how on social media, people's life choices and business choices start to turn into advice that you're supposed to follow? In fact, I think some of the most popular posts and certainly the most popular influencers on social media are people who speak in the language of you. You should do this, you should try that, you should stop doing this, you should be more authentic, you should take better care of yourself, you should have this habit or that habit. Advice has turned into the currency of our online culture. Well, a few years ago, I started to get really uncomfortable with this because I started to see how more and more of my life choices and more of my business choices were not advice that were applicable to anyone but me. They were just that. They were my choices. And I got really tired of constantly trying to turn my choices and what was working for me into advice for you. This is why we created the What Works Network. It's why we do what we do. It's why our whole business is built on a community model, a collaborative learning experience model, as opposed to a let me tell you what to do model. And that's why inside the What Works Network, we also ask our members to share experience instead of advice. Tell us what's worked for you. Tell us what you've experienced. Tell us how you've gotten through certain situations, scenarios, obstacles in your business. And that'll be great information, great data points, great stories that others can use to find their own path forward. But this isn't just a policy that we've adopted inside the What Works Network. This is something that I have tried to really integrate into the way I speak, the way I share, and the kinds of content that I create. It would be really easy for me to create a popular post, a popular podcast episode all about how to market your business, how to network better, how to build a community-based business. But that would be my advice, and it would be based on the choices that I've made and what's worked for me, as opposed to what might work for you. So inside the What Works Network, we ask you to share or contribute in 3 different ways. First, you can share your stories. You can share the situations that you have lived through. You can share the obstacles that you've overcome. You can tell us the story of yourself and of your business instead of advice. We also ask you to share your experience instead of advice. So when someone has a question about something that you have experience with, let us know. Let us know what your experience of that situation, that obstacle, that goal, that plan was. And finally, you can share your observations. You can share what's worked for your clients. You can share what you see going on in the market. Now, that's not to say that there is no room for advice in the What Works Network or really anywhere. Of course, there's room for advice. Of course, we want to learn from people who have that kind of wisdom and knowledge and experience. But we want to make sure that advice is shared in a container, in a context that is helpful for both parties involved. And the key here is consent. We want to make sure that advice and coaching only happen with consent. So that means that if you've got a question or a problem that you're really looking for advice or coaching on, that you say, I'm looking for advice, or I'm looking for coaching, or both. And that's fine. Keep those things to a minimum because you probably need less advice and less coaching than you think, but that's totally fine. And then on the flip side of that, if you're responding to someone who's asking for experiences or observations or stories, and you have advice or you have the capacity to coach that person a little bit, you need to ask consent to be able to do that. So you can say, I've got some advice for you based on my experience. Are you interested in hearing that advice? Or I'm a coach who specializes in this kind of problem. Can I ask you a few questions? Asking for that consent makes sure that both parties involved in the conversation are on the same ground, the same footing, and they understand the conversation in the same way. If you want to avoid giving advice or unintentionally trying to coach someone because that's just how you show up, first off, kudos for being conscious of that. And second, I've got 3 scripts that you can use to ensure that you're not giving advice and that you're not inadvertently coaching someone. The first thing is to say, this is what worked for me. When you say, this is what worked for me, it's really hard to give advice because you're sharing from your actual experience. Similarly, the second thing you can say is, in my experience, and then share your experience, share your story. And then third, you can say, here's what I've seen work for someone in a similar situation. So again, those 3 scripts are, this is what's worked for me, in my experience, and here's what I've seen work for someone in a similar situation. When you use those 3 scripts, you can be assured that you're going to be sharing a story, you're going to be sharing experience, you're going to be sharing observations as opposed to advice, and you're not going to trample on someone's consent to advice or coaching. At What Works, we believe that the more we're honestly and transparently sharing our experience, the more we're talking about the hard lessons that we've learned as small business owners, the more we share what's actually working for us, the better off we all are. It's sort of that rising tide lifts all boats kind of mentality. We believe these kinds of conversations help everyone out. So remember, avoid advice, avoid coaching, and instead share your experience, share your story, and share your observations.